Thank you very much for still staying with us. And if you're just joining us, you're watching Nigeria Decides. ICT in Nigeria has faced and is still facing a lot of challenges, from power, setting up and maintaining infrastructure.
To get in funds, actually, we have two guests in the studio to talk about not just the problems, but the proper solutions, no matter how small.
Well, we have Mr. Ezekiel Igboye, the Chief Operating Officer of RAC Center, and Damilare Ogunleye, co-founder, Souvenir.com. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Thank you for coming.
Now, Ezekiel, Damilare would like to have your thoughts, first and foremost. Which areas do you think we are lagging behind, the areas where we have infrastructural deficits, especially with a focus on technology in Nigeria?
Okay, I think for me, generally, I'd like us to first understand that we operate in a global context. And in the sense that we operate in a global context, when you look at global economies and you look at successful economies, you find out that they're related to technology readiness is quite high. And that clearly shows you efficiency in the way businesses are done in those countries. The World Economic Forum, recent data that came out, clearly tells us that 70% of the 10 top economies have extremely very high technology readiness in terms of infrastructure. So when we bring that down to Nigeria and look at it from a Nigerian context, we have to fully well understand that we've got a huge SME base over here. We have over 20 million SMEs currently in the country. The SMEs are the heart of the country. They are the engines of the economy over here. So we've got to look at how does that impact the technology readiness that we currently have in Nigeria. How does that impact the SMEs to be able to do business efficiently and be able to have productivity and also be profitable in the country. So from an infrastructure point, I think the key things I like to highlight here is around broadband penetration. Broadband definitely gives access to internet connectivity, and with internet connectivity, pretty much all fintech and technology relies on connectivity. So with the current state at which we have our internet penetration, which is good, we had a 30% target, which we barely just achieved. But also if we look at it, okay, fine, we've achieved that 30%. But really, how deep do we have those penetration? Pretty much around the urban areas. And also within that 30%, I mean, there was some data that came out from NCC that tells us that 90% of that 30% that's been achieved was achieved under 2G technology. 2G technology is pretty much old. We're talking 3 and 4G. I mean, in the advanced world, already doing 5. But I mean, let's just take a little bit step backwards in Nigeria and say 4. 4, the adoption is exceptionally slow. So what does that mean for the small businesses? Access to internet, cheap internet is a problem. And also speed to connectivity and all those key things are a challenge for the small businesses.
Larry, quickly chip in your thoughts. What are some of the bottlenecks I think we have to address, especially talking about technology infrastructure?
Oh, well, thank you very much. I think you've spoken to like baselines of what those challenges are. So connectivity. I'd like to take mine from the soft point of view, which is skill sets. As an entrepreneur, is one thing that, I mean, I think it was which day or the other that something came out on Twitter and people were talking about the fact that the rate at which Nigeria is losing talents to the rest of the world, what is going to happen is we're going to be experiencing new oil. So we're going to export our talent to the rest of the world. We're going to develop technology that we're going to then import, and then we're going to pay for that again, right? So I think we're losing, I think that would be one, that would be skill sets. I think the second one for me would also speak to the fact that everyone talks about this, which is access to funding. But I also would like to demystify that to also say we do not have testing grounds. So everyone, Lagos, for instance, or the Yaba Valley, right, as it's been called, has been glorified. But if you look at the valley we've tried to replicate around there, which is Silicon Valley, you will see the ecosystem that makes Silicon Valley work is not present locally, right? So you've got the institutions where I relate Stanford University. It's been proven that Stanford University is one of the most important reasons why you have the Silicon Valley, right? So we've got a Yaba, but there's no similitude of some sort or no interaction between Yaba Tech, Unilag, and the ecosystem that is thriving there, right? The Yaba ecosystem that is thriving there. So I think that's the second one. I think there are a few more challenges. There's also policy. It's talked about the fact that broadband penetration, and we know that one of the challenges with that is just simple policy, right of way, right? And the issues around what cost should be paid for it. So there's the policy, and I think there's also this challenge sometimes of general understanding. I like to define, we do not have a technology vision for the nation, right?
Okay, let's take a look at this video of the Minister for Communication talking about internet and connectivity and small solutions to tech problems in Nigeria. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Company, you need to have, masts all over the place, and these masts, I have always said this, I mean, with a lot of regret, that Nigeria is perhaps the only country where telecoms companies come, set up, multi-billion-naira infrastructure all over the place, and still has to provide their own electricity. In all other countries that I know, you can always take electricity for granted.
Now, gentlemen, you listened to that little bit of soundbite there from the Minister of Communications, and then at the end of the day, we're now supposed to be providing solutions to all of these issues. Now, what are the areas that you think we should be touching on and how to improve on that? You mentioned broadband penetration as well. We're at a threshold of 30%. That's not doing too bad, but we can do much more. And how would this now have a ripple effect on making Nigeria a digital economy?
From my perspective, we've got to also consider and really look into ease of doing business as well. It's very important because with those ease of business challenges, it does have a negative impact in small businesses trying to start up, and also even the big businesses to continue operations. One key fundamental infrastructure which it's important for me to highlight here is the data center. Data center typically hosts technology. So if you look at the value chain of technology, you've got the applications which you use to consume and deliver your services. And those applications reside on servers, which do the processing and all that for you. And then you require network for connectivity. All this value chain reside in the data center. So if you don't have a reliable data center infrastructure, it's actually it should be looked at as a national infrastructure. If you don't have reliable data center services, you cannot provide the appropriate services that today's businesses and consumers require. We are in an internet age. Services are consumed 24/7. Clients' expectations are extremely high. They expect reliability. So for you to be able to have all those things in place, you have to have the right facility.
Internet of Things really making the rounds on the international basis.
Yeah.
We see what goes on there, and they would also like to replicate, isn't it?
Definitely.
Before we go on, let's take a step back and talk about what actually are these tech problems for small businesses could face. Let me come to you.
Well, I think that one of the things he's talked about, and you could think about the extensions, or would be just connectivity. I make this very simple example. I was with a friend who's from Kenya, a Kenyan entrepreneur, and we're basically talking about internet, and he was telling me, oh, he has this, and I'm like, well, I have 3 internet service providers in my office because I know sometimes even the one that's broadband sometimes is going to fail, and I provide services that should not fail, right? So I need to have backup, and then the backup has backup, right? And that also dovetails into even power, right? You can have power, but you don't need to have power, right? So that's one of the challenges, and I think that is a challenge that for some reason we've learned to leapfrog past, right? We found ways around it, so you've got the backup of the backup of the backup. That's one challenge. The second challenge is challenge of what I would call challenge of data, right? Generally, we try to talk about this in tech, in startup world, where someone presents this data and says, this is Nigeria. Another person presents data, this is Nigeria. And we can't come to a compromise on what really is Nigeria, because there are no data points that you can say this data point is absolute and unquestionable, right? If I was going to match an industry, for instance, in the US, I can go back and say, this is the industry profiling of this particular industry, right? And I can even determine, and it affects everything. It affects even how you think about funding, because I can say this is the data that drives funding historically. This is how the businesses in this industry have been rated, right?
So how do we now get things right is the question here. With all of the issues you've raised, how do we get things right?
Well, okay, so so I like to think about I'm a very solution-oriented person, and I think that one of the basic approaches that we need to then take is first to have a national. For someone, it can be called a roadmap, right?
We already have an ICT roadmap for 2017 to 2020. I was going to ask that in your rating, how would you rate the level of implementation? And we just have just a year to go. And if we've had that time frame from 2017 to 2020, how do you think we fared?
Okay, so I mean, I would just, without prejudice to that, I know that the new roadmap is already been drafted, right? Because I got the mail saying we wanted inputs. I'll think that, and I know that sometimes it's difficult to then have these conversations and not talk about politics or talk about the role of governance. But I think that it's critical. First, that the input of stakeholders in the roadmap that was drafted 2017 to 2020, how wide was input of stakeholders driven? Yes, I know that NITA, for instance, is trying, and they're trying to do something that is a bit wider than it used to be before. But how was the 2017 to 2020 drafted, right? What are the reflections of the present of where we are presently when those things were drafted? I would think that implementation, I can't score them, right? Because I honestly can't score them. You can, because you probably need to do research. You probably know what to, but I can score them the way it affects my business, and I know what to score.
Yeah, they're everyday Nigerians,
exactly.
So you also have the right to score. But Ezekiel, quickly now, your thoughts on the ICT roadmap as well from 2017 till now, and then we have barely just 1 year, and we're supposed to say we've ticked that off successfully.
Yes, I think for me, I fully well understand and appreciate that government plays a great role in setting policies and all that. But I feel very strongly that the private sector plays a much stronger role in ensuring that those policies and those roadmaps are actually achieved. The public sector the private sector tend to invest heavily in technology. So what we've done in Rack Center, the company I work for and I represent, we have invested substantially in creating the ecosystem that is available, quality, best in class today, comparable to any facility globally, to be able to give both the SMEs and enterprises an appropriate solution to their technology needs. For example, in Rack Center today, we've got all the ISPs and carriers in our facility. It's actually the most connected data center in sub-Saharan Africa. We've got over 30 ISPs providing connectivity. So what does that mean for all our clients and potential clients? It means it reduces cost for you, because you have all the ISPs available there, and you can have backup of ISPs. Also, we run the Internet Exchange Point. So the Internet Exchange Point, what it does is it limits and restricts traffic that are meant to be going, and you don't need to send out your traffic out there. You can consume local traffic, and it can stay locally. And that gives you an efficiency in terms of quality of service and latency. So that's another key thing. We're also focusing on cloud, because cloud is the solution for the SMEs. Without cloud, the SMEs will struggle because they don't have the cash to actually go out there and procure. Exactly. Yeah. So we're building an ecosystem of cloud with the various cloud suites that suits the SME community as well.
Just hold your thought there, and we'll come back to you again. Let's just go on a quick break. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Glad to have you back, and if you're just joining us, well, this is the third segment of Nigeria Decides, and we're focusing on having solutions to Nigeria's infrastructural deficit when we are talking about technology. And we have with us Ezekiel Igboye, a technology expert, as well as Damilare Ogunleye, an entrepreneur. Now, gentlemen, before we took that short break, we were talking about the roadmap, ICT roadmap 2017 to 2020, and how far with the implementation in your own scorecard? And you said we could do a little much more than that. But now, what do you expect, especially in areas of specialization, recruitment and training of ICT experts in Nigeria? We need more of that, I believe you concur. But there's also the trend that we don't have new app developers having the enabling environment to be able to thrive, because small investors come and they go.
Oh, okay. I was almost wondering who the question was for. That's the truth. It's the fact. And right now, I think we're on the tangent where we're preferring solutions, right? And I would also hit the bat right of where Mr. Ezekiel stopped, which is the fact that I also think that private entities also they need to play a role in development of talent. I think they're doing a bit, but there's also a bit more that can happen. I use an example of I went to the University of Lagos. And I remember that Niger Doc, my first degree is in engineering. I remember that Niger Doc built a facility within the engineering department of the University of Lagos, where they were particularly training people on fabrication and all that stuff. Right. So I think that private entities who are also needing to develop talents can also do those kinds of partnerships where they are working with local institutions and then they're getting them to help them to train those kinds of talents. That would be something that I think will work in that regard.
Ezekiel, now talking about areas of specialization, yes, we know that Andela is doing a good job. We know that the NIT is doing a good job, and then the NITD is also doing a good job trying to ensure that we have a workforce who would drive this digital economy. But at the end of the day, how important is it that we have to specialize? Because at the end of the day, if you're not specialized in a particular area, you cannot be optimum and even beat that level you've set for yourself.
Yes, I totally agree with you. I think specialization is key, because once you're specialized, you have the very detailed expertise to be able to provide the solution and the service. I also think we need to encourage our universities. We tend to sideline those universities. We have to find out ways that private technology companies can partner with these universities to provide them the required experience and knowledge that is required to be able to groom the youth. I also would encourage technology experts to do a lot around mentoring, CSV as well, in taking up young individuals and guiding them through the process of understanding what is required for them to be successful in whatever they're doing. What we've done in RAC Center is ensure that we pay a lot of attention to our staff. We train our staff. And we believe as you train your staff also train other people as well. So that knowledge is spread in those ways. The gentleman over here just talked about Niger Doc as well. In the past, Niger Doc is the parent company of RAC Center. So RAC Center is part of the Jagal Group. And through the ethos of the Jagal Group, we also have a CSV within a CSR, my apology, within that ecosystem that we also enhance the young ones as well.
I'm talking about this ecosystem now. If the roadmap for 2017 to 2020 is supposed to elapse, how do you think we should be drafting, especially if we're looking at churning out a large number of workforce within the ICT level? How should we be improving in that space?
Well, I won't be looking at the number in terms of large force. I'll be looking at the quality, because for me, I think quality rather than quantity. We need to focus that they've got the right curriculum. They have the right environment for them to be able to understand and practice and be able to develop those apps that are required. There has to be funding. I think that's one challenge we have internally in Nigeria. Capital investment is always very, very difficult to get. You don't get patient capital. You don't get cheap capital. Without those, you can't actually provide the enabling environment for the young individuals to be able to grow in that skill set. So I think we need to find ways that we can have direct investment from foreigners coming in. We need to create the right environment that will attract them to come in and do those investments for us as well.
Well, we've had cases of small businesses, small tech companies, they start up and then they have challenge and then they fold up. How can we work to ensure that we don't have a lot of startup that don't make it big?
Okay, just before I answer that, I just wanted to speak to the question on specialization you asked just a few moments ago. The first thing is why specialization is also key. There also needs to be a provision for the non-specialized. I'll give an example. Some of the challenges we have, simple challenges around, I remember I overheard when you were talking about, during the last session, when you were talking about registry, debt registry. I know someone who runs Rwanda Online, and what they basically do is when you give birth, you have these young people who go around with their mobile phones, and they just take pictures and they do, and instantly you get like an instant birth certificate, all uploaded, right? That's not a very sophisticated scale, but that's leveraging technology, and you can't then, that provides jobs. So imagine you're paying this person 1,000 naira per day just to get a birth registration. So there's the specialized part. There's also the part that we then need to make and equip our workforce, which is humongous and getting scarier by the day. We need to empower them digitally and provide them, prepare them for the future. Now, to speak to startup patrician, startups generally die. They die in Nigeria, they die in the US, they die in China, they die everywhere.
But how can we minimize it?
Right, so to minimize that, I think there are two things. The first is there has to be a system, and I like to think about the system, a system that makes failure very failure inexpensive. One of the reasons why startups fail is actually they are the fear of failure, right? That in itself seems like a contradiction. But the reasons why startups fail is actually a fear of failure. So you've got this very limited resources that you need to then pursue certain projects. But what keeps you from pursuing a tangent that probably is failing is that you hear startups in the US, they say they burnt $1 million. You can't burn $1 million in Nigeria, except your dad is woo. So there has to be a provision that allows, and what does that is really OBS. OBS provide that facilitator that makes failure inexpensive, and that way we start to limit it. So when you're providing OBS that are providing shared services where people are not getting, I mean, I had years of experience working, but you have people who are getting right off school, they're not finding jobs, and they're jumping up to create stuff.
Ezekiel, Larry, I would just like to have your final thoughts. We are still basking in the euphoria where New York City is now the world's tech city, beating Silicon Valley. Do you think anytime soon, Lagos State as a city would be able to raise itself up, utilize the computer village space and make it a hub that really
I honestly think so, because if you look at Lagos State is the 5th largest economy in Africa. That's a big deal. So we're saying, I mean, the data is out there. Lagos State generates far more revenue than a lot of the African countries. Population is very key as well. If you look at the market, the population of Lagos is over 20 million. That's the size of Belgium and Netherlands together. So we've got a population there. We've got a huge market for the SMEs. We've got very strong entrepreneurs that daily are providing great services in Lagos. And also, I think the Lagos the government is doing exceptionally well in the sense that they're trying to provide the right environment to be able to allow businesses to thrive. They focus also, they have a great focus on technology as well. I mean, we work with Lagos State government as well in Rack Center. We host their infrastructure as well. And that clearly shows you that they believe in quality and they're constantly innovating and see how they can work with various stakeholders. But there's still a whole lot more that can be done in that respect. Definitely, there's always room. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Yes. We've been speaking with Larry Ogunleye as well as Ezekiel Igboye. Good evening, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
And I hope you've been enjoying this conversation on ICT in Nigeria. We're taking a short break. Remember to join on all of our conversations on Plus TV Africa across our social media platforms.
We'll be right back. Just stay with us.